of the presenters here present today, kindly take note that you are only given 15 minutes to discuss your discussions, your talks, and your studies. So, without further ado, let me introduce to you our first speaker for this this session. She obtained her Bachelor of Arts degree in Linguistics and Literature from the University of San Carlos, where she is currently a Master of Arts. Okay. She is a teacher, researcher, writer, and translator. She writes poetry in English and Cebuano. Her poems were included in anthologies published by the USC Cebuano Study Center. She is a member of the literary groups Mga Anak sa Dagang, Inc. and the Women in Literary Arts Cebu, Inc. She has done technical and literary translations for different organizations and is a member of a group of translators, In Other Words Incorporated. A round of applause to Ms. Jonalyn P. Gabales.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin with my expression of gratitude to the organizers of this conference, and especially to the Secretariat, who has been very patient with me, and for many of us also. All right, so I begin. It's actually not a paper, it's also a teaching module on literature, art, and society. My motivation initially for creating this module is for my Arts 1 and Lit 4 students in UP Cebu, especially for the latter, Literature 4, which is considered as a Philippine Studies course, and practically all UP students take it. Arts 1 is a GE course also, on the critical study of the experience, language, and context of art. And part 3 of the syllabus actually examines the theories of production of art, and particularly in this case, literary production. For Literature 4, which is another GE course, it's a one-semester survey of Sugbuanon literature that covers works from folk tradition, classical tradition, and contemporary voices. Now, speaking of contemporary voices, next slide, please. Dr. Erlinda Alburo, of course, is definitely one of the important contemporary writers in Cebuano literature. She is a founding member and one of the major poets of the Women in Literary Arts and literary mother to many of us. Next slide, please. Okay, so since it's a module, I start with the learning objectives. So at the end of this module, the students should be able to explain the scholarship and theories of literary production that inform our understanding of how art is produced and valued. Of course, this is done through the readings, which is, of course, very challenging to many teachers. Challenging in the sense of, encouraging students to really read. Second, to determine how socioeconomic and even medical or health conditions have enriched the way literature is produced, valued, and experienced. And finally, to produce their own creative work, poetry as well, or documentation based on known medicinal plants within their communities. All right, next slide, please. All right, so in this module, focus is given on how the work of art, in this case poetry, relates to the cultural context from which the poetry emerges. Here, the student will get to understand that literary works or poetry are produced from history, culture, and society. Particularly through this module, we appreciate Alburo's poetry as a repository of that body of knowledge that gives importance to Filipino traditional medicine. At this point, I make an aside. I don't know if you remember, there's this commercial on a cough syrup, I think, and then the endorser for that commercial said something like, "Wag aasa sa dahon-dahon lang." So it's like a diss on traditional or medicinal plants. And so from that, we get the attitude na, well, if it's medicinal plant, it's folk medicine, it's quack medicine, so it's not so good. No? But the thing is, the past 3 years has had us reeling from health concerns. Certainly the solution to the pandemic is the vaccine, and in record time, several brands were produced. But aside from physical distancing, mask wearing, the primary self-care suggestion is maintaining a healthy diet. Nowadays, we often hear the phrase, "let thy food be thy medicine," emphasizing the importance of nutrition in preventing or curing disease. A related practice, which is also undergoing revival, is the use of botanicals or herbs, no? Valued for their medicinal and therapeutic properties, many of which are, of course, ingested as teas or as raw or cooked food. Such a practice is called phytomedicine or phytotherapy. Now, so that's the term. Next slide, please. So phytomedicine is not new. In her study, Benefits of Mainstreaming Herbal Medicine in the Philippine Healthcare System, Cecilia Maramba-Lazarte mentions that Filipino traditional medicine, of which herbal medicine plays a large role, has been around for centuries, and that our Philippine medicinal plants are valuable but often underappreciated resource. She, however, emphasizes that validating the use of these traditional medicinal plants through a research is essential in order to have an evidence-based practice of herbal medicine. Our own DOH and the World Health Organization have made endorsements to support the movement of developing traditional medicine or herbal medicine. So we have the Traditional and Herbal Medicine Act of 1997. There is the endorsement of DOH of the 10 halamang gamot in the 1990s. I will not, there's a list to that one. No? And then the World Health Organization has actually advocated the integration of traditional medicine within national healthcare systems. The idea is that many people are marginalized because medicines are so expensive, but with the development and introduction of medicinal plants, no, which we can have in our backyard, it will help, have lesser costs, no, in the medication. One support of this movement comes from an unexpected source, that is the nature poetry of Erlinda Alburo from Sinug-ang ang Bag-ong Haon. Next slide, please. Okay, and so I come to the supplemental readings for this, and this would be the essays of Salvador Lopez and Walter Benjamin, entitled Literature and Society, and author as producer, respectively. The last one has already been mentioned earlier. Okay, so in the teaching of this module, I start really with the readings, the supplemental readings, or asking the students to read such supplemental readings. Sometimes I would have to devise ways to encourage students to read, like normal recitation, graded, so I guess they would be encouraged somehow so that they want to get the grade, or through games. Are you familiar with the true or false, and that they have to line up? If they get the wrong answer, they get eliminated, so wala nang chance for the prize, to get the prize. Interestingly, the prize is chocolate, so not healthy for some, but maybe it also helps the student, get the energy, because sometimes they get so sleepy also. So anyway, yon. No? Next slide, please. So there's a discussion on the essays, and so I just put here some highlights from Salvador Lopez, no? Literature and Society. Lopez explains that the writer may remain devoted to the creation of art and to extol the beauty of art and nature, but they also may not refuse to use words in the service of people and society. At this point, the writer will have to ally his ideas with the pursuit of justice and truth, or in this case, Lopez mentioned a terrible happening, and so the writer has to react to this terrible happening through his writing. So in this case, the terrible happening would be the pandemic, I suppose. And a writer can write about medicinal plants in relation to diseases. Right? Next slide, please. Similarly, Benjamin mentions that society will not be inclined to give, to give autonomy to the writer to write as he please. And so the social situation, or in this case, the phenomenon of the pandemic, will force the writer to choose to whom or to what their writing will serve. Benjamin calls this directing of the writer's activity as pursuing a tendency or a commitment. And for me, the commitment of Dr. Alburo to write about these plants that have medicinal qualities is also a worthy or a right tendency or a right commitment. Benjamin asserts that the correct tendency or correct commitment includes a literary tendency or literary quality. And this has something to do with the development of technique. Right. Next slide, please. Okay, so main learning materials would be the poems themselves, and of course, the essay of our own Dr. Hope Saban-Panyu, Garden Blooms, Act of Environmental Imagination in Erlinda Alburo's poetry. Garden Blooms is composed of 12 poems, 11 poems on flowering plants, and one parang overarching poem that creates the fictional character of Almira and her grandmother. The grandmother is knowledgeable about the medicinal plants, and so she teaches Almira, who is also interested, to document them, put them down in writing so that they will not be forgotten. Right. Okay. So now we come to the main reading material, the poetry itself. I already said that. Okay. For our purpose, we will not take a look at all 12, just even one or two from the 5 relevant poems. No? And in relation to that, can we take a look at the next slide? No? We have the guide question. No? How do the key points or ideas in the essays of Walter Benjamin, Salvador Lopez, and Hope Saban-Panyu frame your thinking about your understanding and experience of Alburo's eco-poetics, particularly in the poems Mga Bulak sa Hardin, Pukingan, Kalatsutsi, Ilang-ilang, and Rosal? No? Of course, na ay translation sa mga names ani uban. No? All right. So the class discussion goes further as to relate the key ideas from the critical essays and Dr. Alburo's literary production. Like, for example, Benjamin talks about right tendency and right commitment. And for me, as mentioned earlier, there's a right commitment from Alburo when she took that subject matter for her for her poetry. All right. Next slide, please. Okay. This is only the highlight also of Hope's critical essay. In her paper, Garden Blooms, Act of Environmental Imagination of Erlinda Alburo's Poetry, Saban-Panyu exhorts that Alburo's poetry deserves attention because of her inventiveness, so that is the technique that Benjamin was also talking about, and aesthetic accomplishment. Additionally, Yu studies Alburo's poetry as a critique on culture, since the poems also offer readers a way of seeing the world through, of course, the subject matter, which are the plants. Okay, so let's take a look at Almira's Garden poem. Can we just? So this is the list of poems that I think are relevant. No? And then next slide, please. Is the Cebuano, no? So it's written in Cebuano, but maybe we can skip. We go to the English translation, which is 18. Yeah. So, if I may. Here in this garden, she sees light whenever her sight dims. She knows that the colorful ones are lined near the old well, where she draws water from her thirsty friends, the hibiscus, the adelpha, the blue ternate, or ternate. Towards the high gate are the trees that also show off their offering of the day, the kalachuchi, the champaka, and the ilang-ilang. And since we're pressed for time, can we move to the... yes, that one. And so the story goes that Almira's sight is dimming. But before that happens, Almira has gradually written down the medical uses and other memorable things about those flowers in her garden that others living in their place do not notice because they rely on the doctor's prescription. Her grandmother, Lola Maya, was the one who taught her about these flowers. And so in the other poems, it's mentioned that the kalachuchi is for itches and boils, the ilang-ilang is for high blood pressure, the result cures the feverish, etc. All right. All right, next, slide 26, jump. Okay na. No? So the frangipani. Sabanpanyu points out that the poem Frangipani is an example that gives us the model of Alburo's techniques. So the qualities of the plant are listed down. Her juice can heal itches. Her leaves are applied on boils. Her boiled bark for Eltor, and I don't know what Eltor is. Swollen gums and toothaches. I see. Next slide, please. Gamay na lang. So after this discussion, we have the engagement activity, which is slide 33. I just put all the, this one. Yeah? So they take a look at the list of, the students are asked to take a look at the list of mainstream phytomedicine in the Philippines. So, and choose one plant for study. Or they can interview someone in their community and so be introduced to a plant that is known to have medicinal quality. And so from the interview, they can create a documentation in the form of multimedia recording or photographs of this plant if they can still be found in the community. So there could be also a creative work. They can make their own poems regarding the plant that they newly discovered from the interviews. And so if you go to the next slide, this is my attempt. Mine is mangagaw or the tawa-tawa. Next slide. So I listed down the things that I observed from the tawa-tawa. And then last, I made my own poem. Last na gid ni. Lunhaw og balhibuon tanom nga pino, mahimong magpahayahay ang susong amigo. If you can see, there's a small snail. Timailhan nga di makalarag ning hilba nga tanos, tambal sa dengue, makatabang sa kabus. I end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gabales, for that wonderful discussion. You know what, through your talk, we did not only unpack Alburo's ecopoetics, but we also touched on the topic of phytomedicine. It's a very interesting study. If the students here present today would like to have that as reference for the research, probably you'd like to touch on that topic.